expect to die on a Tuesday. I was folding laundry, humming along to the Divine Mercy Chaplet, playing softly from my phone. The sky outside was gray and there was a gentle drizzle on the kitchen window. Just another quiet Ohio morning. I'd made some tea, sorted the towels, and thought about calling my daughter. And then, like someone flipped a switch, my chest tightened and everything around me faded. They tell me my heart stopped. 23 minutes, no pulse. I suppose they'd call it clinical death. All I remember was slipping, not into blackness but into silence. Gentle, comforting, almost like sinking into warm water. And then I was rising, not just my soul, my whole awareness, myself, lifted upward with no effort at all. I could see the room below me, my body slumped on the tile, the paramedics trying to revive me. I felt no fear, no pain, only peace. Deep, ocean deep peace. And then the light came. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It didn't shine at me, it received me. I passed into it, or maybe it passed into me. It's hard to describe. There was no ceiling, no horizon, no walls, just presence. And I knew, more deeply than I've ever known anything, that I wasn't alone. Someone was there, not in front of me, not beside me, but all around. A warmth that knew me, loved me, and saw me completely. That's when I saw him. An angel, I think, not like the ones in paintings. He had no wings, no halo. He looked like light-wearing form. Beautiful, strong, not male or female, just immense. He didn't speak, but I heard him clearly. "You are not done," he said. "There is something you must see, and something you must say." Before I could ask what that meant, I was standing in St. Peter's Square, in Rome. Not floating, standing. I could feel the stone under my feet, hear the murmurs of a crowd, see the Vatican before me, majestic and timeless. And then, the balcony doors opened, and there he was. Donald Trump, wearing papal white, a golden cross around his neck, a white zucchetto on his head, his face solemn. The crowd didn't cheer right away. They stood frozen as if the world had tilted sideways. Then, slowly, applause, bells, shouts, a roar that rolled through the square like a wave. I turned to the angel. "What is this? How is this possible?" And he answered, "The one you least expect is the one I will use." Then it was gone. The light, the square, the angel. I opened my eyes in the hospital bed, gasping. My daughter was holding my hand, crying. The first words I spoke weren't mine. They came from a place deeper than my voice. "He will become Pope in May." I didn't tell my daughter everything right away. How could I? I had just come back from death, and the words were still catching fire on my tongue. I could barely sit upright without help, but my mind felt more awake than it ever had, like something had been poured into me that didn't belong to this world. She was crying beside me, holding my hand tightly, whispering prayers of thanks under her breath. I could see the relief in her eyes, and I didn't want to scare her. But I had to say something, so I told her the first part, that I had seen heaven, that I had been told to come back, that I saw something I didn't understand, something I needed to talk to a priest about. She just nodded and squeezed my hand tighter. "One miracle at a time, Mom," she said through a laugh. "Let's just be grateful you're alive." But I knew what I saw. It wasn't a dream. I've had dreams before. Strange ones, holy ones even. This wasn't like that. This had weight, clarity, like I'd been pulled out of time and shown something anchored in the will of God himself. The image of Donald Trump in papal white was still burned into my memory. I could still hear the echo of the angel's words, "The one you least expect is the one I will use." I needed to tell someone who would take me seriously. So 2 days later, when the priest from my parish came to visit, Father Jordan, I asked to speak with him alone. He smiled gently when I told him I'd had a near-death experience. But when I told him the details, that smile faltered. He listened, he didn't interrupt, but I saw the lines tighten around his eyes. I could tell he was trying to be pastoral, but also cautious, the way a man looks when he thinks someone might be slipping into delusion. I understood. I felt the same way. If someone else had told me this, I probably would have thought they were confused, maybe even ill. but I wasn't. When I finished, he folded his hands and said softly, "Mary, we don't always understand visions. Some are symbolic, some are not from God. But even if this was real, there's no possible way Donald Trump could become Pope. He's not a cardinal. He's not even Catholic." I didn't argue. I just looked him in the eyes and said the words that had been echoing in my soul since I woke up. "It will happen in May." He blinked. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, placed his hand on mine, and said, "Let us pray for clarity." But I didn't need clarity. I needed courage. Because deep in my soul, I could feel it. Something was coming. And this wasn't just about a man, it was about the church, about a shift in history, a warning and a test. I couldn't sleep that night, not because of pain. The doctors had managed that. It was something else, a kind of fire in my chest that pulsed every time I closed my eyes. The vision wouldn't let me go. The square, the bells, the robes, the silence before the applause. It all came rushing back in waves, more vivid than any memory I've ever had. And every time I prayed, "Hail Mary, our Father," even the Divine Mercy chaplet, I heard the word May. Around 3 a.m, I finally drifted off. But it wasn't sleep, it was something else. I found myself in a chapel I'd never seen before. Dark wood pews, candlelight flickering on stone walls, and the scent of roses thick in the air. In the center stood a statue of Our Lady, cloaked in blue, her eyes lowered in sorrow. A presence stood beside me, not the same angel as before. This one felt maternal, not soft, but steady, protective. She didn't speak with words, she didn't need to. Her gaze pierced me, and suddenly I knew what I was being shown. 3 children, a son dancing, a secret buried for decades. Fatima. I don't know how I knew. I had heard the story before, the apparitions, the warnings, the so-called third secret, but it had never meant much to me. Now it did. Deeply. I saw flashes. A white city in ruins, a pope walking through corpses, a great cry from the heavens, and behind it all, a golden cross rising from smoke, and then the face of Trump again, this time kneeling, weeping, holding a rosary in both hands, his lips moving. He was praying. The presence beside me, maybe it was Our Lady, maybe not, finally spoke, not aloud, but within my soul. He is not the fulfillment, he is the interruption, and the storm must break before the silence comes. I awoke in tears. I stared at the ceiling for nearly an hour. I couldn't explain it. I didn't even want to believe it, but every part of me knew. This wasn't over. And that what I'd seen was connected to something much older, much holier, something we had forgotten. I whispered a prayer to the Virgin, asking for understanding, and I knew, somehow, that the answer would come, but not through books, or priests, or prophecy. It would come from what was about to happen in Rome. 3 days later, I was discharged. The doctors said it was a miracle. They called it a recovery event, their fancy way of admitting they had no explanation. I was given new medications, a fragile heart monitor, and instructions to rest. But resting was the last thing I could do. I had seen something I didn't want to believe but couldn't escape. And May was coming quickly. I kept the TV off for a while. The news always made me feel worse, and after what I saw, I didn't want to cloud my thoughts with noise. But that morning, something nudged me. A quiet prompting, like the Holy Spirit tapping my shoulder. I turned on the news, flipped past the noise, and stopped cold at a headline I'll never forget. Pope Francis hospitalized in critical condition. My hand trembled. I turned up the volume. They were saying it was sudden. Complications from an infection, but more serious than anyone expected. Vatican insiders were monitoring closely. No visitors were being allowed. Reporters outside Gemelli Hospital looked grim. I sat frozen, not out of fear for the Pope, though I prayed for him immediately, but because I knew, deep down, this was it, the beginning. The gears of heaven were turning. The vision wasn't just spiritual poetry, it was real. Over the next few days, things spiraled quickly. Pope Francis was transferred to intensive care. A Vatican spokesman gave a vague, brief statement asking for prayers, but behind the soft words, the world could sense it. The chair of Peter was about to be empty. And then it happened. At dawn on a quiet Friday, the Vatican bells rang. Morning bells, white flags half lowered, candlelight lit the square. The Holy Father had died. I wept, not just for his soul, may God receive him, but because I had seen what was coming next, and I knew the world wasn't ready. I didn't know how it would happen. Trump wasn't a bishop, not even a Catholic. It made no earthly sense, but heaven wasn't playing by earthly rules. And what I'd seen in that vision, the crowd, the robe, the rosary in his hand, was no longer just impossible. It was inevitable. The days that followed felt like the world was holding its breath. News coverage blanketed the screen, tributes, Vatican rituals, speculation about who would be next. I stayed home, my rosary always in hand, praying for the church, for the cardinals, for clarity, but my heart beat with something else. Urgency. I kept hearing it. That voice, that word, May. And then, late one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Father Jordan. He sounded shaken. "Mary, I need to speak with you privately." I invited him over that evening. When he walked into my living room, he didn't greet me with his usual warmth. He sat down, looked at his hands for a long time, and finally spoke. "I received a message this morning from a priest I knew back in seminary. He's now working in the Apostolic Palace." He paused. I could see the weight behind his eyes. Something was bothering him deeply. He told me there's talk inside the Vatican, not public, not even among the cardinals, but whispers, that a proposal, an extraordinary one, has been drafted, not from Europe, not from the bishops, from outside. My breath caught in my throat. He continued. He didn't say the name, but he said it was someone utterly improbable, someone sent to bring a reckoning. The idea was dismissed at first, but now, with the seat vacant and chaos rising, some are taking it seriously. I whispered it before I could stop myself. "Trump." Father Jordan looked at me. His silence was answer enough. He stood slowly and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back and said something I never expected to hear from a man like him. "Mary, whatever you saw, I think it's already begun." I didn't sleep that night. My heart raced with something I couldn't name. Not fear, not joy, something deeper. Awe, maybe. Dread wrapped in trust. The kind you feel when you're standing on the edge of a prophecy, or when heaven leans just a little too close. The news started shifting, slowly at first, like a tide turning in the dark. At first, it was just speculation. Unprecedented conclave, they called it. Crisis of confidence, one anchor said, his voice tight with something between curiosity and fear. One Vatican reporter even said, "There's talk of inviting a lay figure with global influence, not for papal election, of course, but for a new role, a spiritual leadership outside canonical tradition." I felt the words like cold air down my back. It was happening, but it still sounded like madness to the world. That's how heaven works sometimes. It comes dressed as madness before it's seen as truth. But the real shift came when the networks began replaying an old interview. It was from years ago. Donald Trump had been asked, half-jokingly, if he believed he could lead the church better than the Pope. He'd laughed, but then he'd said, "Maybe not lead it, but I'd clean it up." That clip played over and over. People laughed, people raged. But somewhere in that noise, the unthinkable was seeding itself in public imagination. And then I had the third vision. It didn't come in a dream. It came in prayer. I was holding my rosary, kneeling beside my bed. My heart was restless. Part of me still wanted to believe I'd misunderstood it all, that this couldn't be real. But as I closed my eyes, I was no longer in my room. I was inside a cathedral I'd never seen, crumbling, wounded, full of smoke and silence. The pews were empty. The altar was cracked. Candles flickered weakly. And then I saw the church, not the building, her. A woman dressed in torn robes, wounded, kneeling beside the Eucharist, weeping. Her face looked like every woman I'd ever loved, like my mother, like Mary, the Mother of God. Her veil was stained, her hands were bound, but she was praying. She hadn't given up. I heard footsteps, and Donald Trump entered. Not proud, not powerful, but trembling. He walked up to her. He untied her hands. He didn't say a word. He just knelt beside her, took the rosary from her lap, and began to pray, and the angel's voice returned, this time as thunder and whisper all at once. When the proud are humbled and the broken weep, I will act, not for him, not against him, but for my bride. I woke, gasping, clutching the rosary so tightly the beads had left marks in my palms. I no longer doubted. Not because I understood, but because I had seen the bride and she was still loved. The days that followed were unlike anything I'd seen in my 74 years. The world wasn't spinning, it was unraveling. Commentators, bishops, politicians, even comedians, all of them were suddenly talking about the church, not to mock her this time, but to ask, what happens next? There was panic in some places, laughter in others, and then there were whispers, only whispers at first, that Donald Trump was flying to Rome. My phone rang more than it had in years. Distant relatives, old friends from parish groups, even people I hadn't spoken to in decades. They'd heard from someone that I had seen something before the Pope died. One neighbor left a message. You said May, Mary. It's May now. What are we supposed to do? I didn't have answers, only the truth I'd been given. And then the visitors came. 2 men arrived at my door, unannounced but polite. They weren't dressed like clergy, but they weren't government either. One introduced himself simply as Daniel. The other didn't speak at all. Daniel said he was part of a spiritual research commission connected to the Vatican. That set off alarm bells, but he was calm, respectful, and he already knew what I had seen. We've received reports, Mrs. Caldwell, he said. You're not the only one. He opened a worn leather folder and laid it on my table. Inside were transcripts, dozens of them, handwritten letters, audio recordings, all from people around the world who had reported dreams, visions, and inexplicable warnings, all involving the same strange message. Trump, white robes, Rome, May. I felt lightheaded. Why me? I asked. Daniel looked at me with a kind of reverence, not the kind given to someone famous, but the kind given to someone who has seen something weighty. Because you're not loud, and because God always uses the simple. Before they left, Daniel gave me a card. No phone number, no title, just a verse handwritten on the back. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. Luke 1:51. They didn't say where they were going next, but I could feel it in the air, thick and undeniable. Something holy, or terrifying, was about to descend on the world. By the second week of May, the world was watching Rome. No one was watching the stock market, no one was watching sports. Every camera was fixed on the Vatican, where the cardinals had gathered for what should have been a routine conclave. But this was not a routine year, and what they were deciding behind those sealed doors was no longer just about tradition or hierarchy. It felt like the world itself was on the edge of some cosmic shift. And then, it happened. Not a puff of white smoke. Not yet. First, a press briefing. Vatican officials, visibly strained, emerged before the world and delivered a message that no one could have expected. And yet, I had already heard it, whispered in fire and thunder in that place beyond death. Due to the extraordinary times we face and through canonical provisions adapted to this unprecedented moment, the College of Cardinals has entered discernment concerning a possible external apostolic figure, a spiritual leader of Reformation, nominated not from the cardinalate, but from a movement of divine conviction. This individual is not a bishop. He is not a cleric. He is a man of public life whose heart, we believe, has been stirred by grace. They never said his name. They didn't need to. By nightfall, the story had leaked. Journalists ran wild with it. Protesters gathered in Rome. Devout Catholics across the globe took to their knees, confused, furious, pleading for truth. The name began trending in every language: Donald J. Trump. That night, I turned on the television with trembling hands. A live feed showed Trump's private jet touching down in Rome. Reporters screamed questions. His face looked different, less angry, less certain, almost humbled. He didn't speak to the cameras. He walked into a waiting car with his head low and a rosary visible in his hand, red, white, and gold. That image alone made me cry, not because it proved me right, but because it proved that someone had touched him, and I remembered what the angel said. The one you least expect is the one I will use. At midnight, my front door shook. I opened it to find my priest, Father Jordan, standing on my porch, pale as paper. He held his phone out with a trembling hand. On it, a video had just been released from Vatican sources. A voice spoke in Latin over sacred music, and in the background, Trump, kneeling before the altar of St. Peter's, weeping. The morning after the video of Trump kneeling in St. Peter's Basilica was released, the world didn't breathe. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the soul of humanity itself had paused, stunned, watching something it didn't have the language for. People were calling it a hoax, a political stunt. Others were calling it blasphemy. And some, mostly the quiet ones, were saying what I felt in my bones. Something is happening that cannot be explained without God. I sat in my armchair, clutching my rosary tighter than ever, and waited. There were no official Vatican announcements that day, just a strange, sacred silence, until the next sunrise. That's when it came. Live from Rome. No fanfare, no scripted media circus, just one man, Donald Trump. Standing alone in the courtyard of St. Damasus, wearing a simple black suit, no podium, no flags, no cheering crowd, just a single wooden cross behind him. His voice cracked at first, then steadied. I don't know why God chose me. I've done nothing to deserve it. I don't pretend to be a saint. I've been proud, I've been wrong, but something happened, something real. He paused. I was warned by someone I trust that I would be used by heaven, not to lead, but to kneel, not to rule, but to repent. I came to Rome because I was called, and if it is God's will that I serve this church, not politically, but prayerfully, then I say yes, with fear, with trembling, with hope. Then, to the world's absolute astonishment, he knelt again, and behind him, slowly from the shadows, emerged a group of cardinals carrying papal white. I covered my mouth and began to weep, not because I was watching a man change history, but because I had seen this already. Not in news headlines, in heaven. And then my phone rang. It was Daniel, the man from the research commission. His voice was quiet. Mrs. Caldwell, he's asked for you. I nearly dropped the phone. He knows about the vision. He wants to speak with the woman who saw it first. I never thought I'd see Rome. I certainly never imagined I'd be flown there by Vatican security, my name known by cardinals, my story read by someone the entire world couldn't stop watching. Yet there I was, a simple woman from Ohio, seated in a quiet chapel behind the bronze doors of the Apostolic Palace, waiting to meet the man I saw in my death. I had prayed for clarity. I had begged heaven not to let this be a trick, a delusion, or a deception. And as I sat there beneath the stained glass, I felt the answer, not in words, in peace. A peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from obedience. Then the door opened. He walked in alone. No cameras, no handlers, just Donald J. Trump. Not dressed in papal garments yet, but changed, not in appearance, but in spirit. His eyes looked heavier and somehow softer. He held a rosary in his right hand. When he saw me, he didn't speak immediately. He just nodded, not in power but in gratitude. He sat across from me and lowered his voice. I've read your account, he said. More than once. I don't understand it, but I can't ignore it. And everything that's happened matches what you saw. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He leaned forward slightly, holding the rosary tighter. I used to think power meant control. Now, I think it might mean surrender. Then he asked the question I didn't expect. What do I do now? I had no answers of my own, but something rose up in me, the same voice I'd heard in the light, and I said it gently. You don't lead the church. You carry her. You serve her. You kneel with her. You pray with her. And when the world mocks her, you defend her." He closed his eyes for a moment, then stood quietly. "Then I'll start with that." And he left the chapel in silence. That night, the bells of St. Peter's rang once more. White smoke curled above the rooftops. The crowd gathered in the square held its breath. And when the balcony opened, the world saw the impossible. Not a man crowned in pride, but one stripped of it. Not a politician, a penitent. And for the first time in decades, I saw something in the eyes of the church herself, the bride I had seen wounded and weeping in my vision. Hope. And I knew deep in my heart the prophecy wasn't about power at all. It was about mercy.